Is social media important? Is Elon Musk a dangerous person? Is Elon truly a free speech advocate? Why did Twitter's co-founder, Jack Dorsey, endorse Elon's X by calling it freedom technology?
If he said any type of speech beyond that is fair game, okay, that's one thing. But that's not really what he's doing. He's saying, hey, it's free speech, but.
Did the Twitter files impact anything? Can the US government shut down TikTok? Is Twitter dying?
They're swinging that pendulum because they're trying to get people to show up, and people aren't going to show up if they feel like everything they see on there is offensive.
Kurt Wagner is a tech reporter for Bloomberg who has been covering X, formerly known as Twitter, for over a decade. During this time, Kurt fostered special relationships with senior ranking staffers, ultimately laying the groundwork for his incredible new book about Twitter, Battle for the Bird: Jack Dorsey, Elon Musk, and the $44 billion fight for Twitter's soul. Kurt, our wide-ranging discussions surrounding social media's impact on society, technology's transformative impact on legacy media, and the new face of Twitter provides us with an important peek into the future. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Some Future Day. All right, Kurt Wagner, how are you today?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited to see you. It's such a pleasure to have you on Some Future Day. Honestly, I think this is a really important topic today. The work that you've done in building this book, Battle for the Bird, is incredible. I understand that it took you several years really to compile this information. How many years did it take you actually to write the book?
So, I started the book. I actually went back and looked. I was pitching the book about 2 years ago, April of 2022. So I guess, from pitching the book to publishing the book, a little under 2 years, but really I've been covering Twitter, now X, of course, for a decade. So even though it's been about 2 years of, book specific work, I mean, I was building off of years and years of sourcing and stories and notes that I'd already taken. So I feel like it's a several year process, even though I guess, technically it was maybe 18 months from start to finish in terms of getting the book out.
An incredible commitment in your lifetime. And, it's pretty cool that you have developed all of these insider types of relationships over at Twitter X. But your vantage point with regards to social media, I would imagine, has to be, looking at things through a wider lens. If you're going to look at what Twitter and X stands for, you must have to have a wider lens as it relates to social media in general.
Yeah, I mean, it's one company that I cover, but I also cover, Meta and all of the apps there, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp. I've covered Snapchat, I've covered TikTok, Pinterest, like all of these sort of consumer social services, not to mention dozens of startups that have come and gone over the years. So, to understand where X fits, you sort of have to understand the broader sandbox where they're playing. But then on top of that, I like to say this about Facebook and X in particular. What happens in the world is literally happening on these platforms, right? So politics, culture, music, business, like you can't just know sort of the ins and outs of the business. You really have to be tuned into like pretty much what's happening in the world, because that's what people are talking about. And that's what drives policies at these companies. That's what drives content issues at these companies. So, it feels like one of those beats that keeps me very widely read, if you will, because I sort of have to know what's going on everywhere.
So is social media important?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it is. I've been getting my news through social media for a really long time. So for me as a news consumer, it's sort of been like the first stop. So at Twitter historically has always been the first stop for me. It's where I'm entertained, right? So I'm not afraid to admit I go to TikTok. I get a lot of entertainment from TikTok and Instagram these days. I stay connected with people that way. I've built a whole community, especially on sort of old Twitter. I say old Twitter, that's sort of pre-Elon Twitter. I had a much bigger community there, both professionally and personally, that I would tap into. So for me, like social media is sort of this like first front door into the internet for me in a lot of ways. It's like the places I go first in order to then jump from there to a specific news website or to a specific video or whatever it may be. I understand, that's not how everyone uses these things, right? And I think there's been a change in perception around social media ever since the 2016 election, quite frankly. I think it sort of, for a long time, was like, hey, these are great. Like, look at, we're all staying connected. We're all, what a great tool this is. And I think the 2016 election was the first moment where we all really said, oh, wow, there's a real negative downside to these companies and these platforms if you're not paying attention. And, I think it's sort of gone downhill from there for a lot of people. So that's just I tend to use these things a lot. And like I said, view them in that way. But I know for other people, the social media industry has really, lost some relevance for them over the last couple of years.
So that's really interesting because on the one side, you're saying it's an amazing source for breaking news, gathering current events, as well as being entertained. But the 2016 election in particular has been transformative in nature. Why do you use the 2016 election as like such a demarcation in the transformation of social media, generally speaking?
Yeah, I mean, I think there were two kind of big things that came out of the 2016 election in the US. The first was this realization that these networks can be manipulated and abused, right? And in this case, it was specific to Russia trying to sway opinion of American voters without anybody knowing about it. And that's just sort of one example, but it sort of opened the door to, oh, well, how else are these networks sort of being manipulated? How else are these networks being abused? How are people being influenced by these networks without necessarily knowing where the content's coming from, right? So I think that was sort of one huge moment of that election. I think the other is just simply having, President Donald Trump in charge in the US and the platform that he had on Twitter in particular, but also Facebook to, be, in my opinion, very divisive, right? And very confrontational. I think it was sort of the start of a divide culturally in the United States. And so I think, okay, on one hand, it's like we've been exposed, these platforms have been exposed to, be manipulative. And on the other hand, it just created this culture war that then I think has, been exacerbated by these platforms, right? Because now you have people who are taking very strong stances on one side or the other. And it just feels like the kind of discussion on these platforms has gotten much more polarizing since 2016. So for those two reasons, I sort of use that as like the moment we took a really hard turn when it comes to social networks.
So, it's pretty significant because it's almost 10 years since that 2016 moment in time. And I wonder, like, what the impact has been on our culture and American society's desire to read long form content, to do the hard work to understand the news, right? Like if I'm taking in the news with Twitter, I get the headline, I click the link, and then I go deeper. But often I'm sure a lot of people feel this way too. I don't have the time, or I don't want to read the long form content off of my phone. I prefer to read it off of my computer or actually with a physical newspaper. So how has the delivery of news then since 2016 transformed our society?
Yeah, well, I think this was happening. I think the distribution of news in this way was pre 2016, to be clear, but I think it just got more and more polarizing starting about then. But I mean, it's snackable, headlines, right? I'm guilty of this too. You scroll through, you read the headline. Okay, great. You sort of make an assumption about what maybe the rest of the story is, and you move on. And you're doing that constantly throughout the day, especially on somewhere like Twitter, but also on Facebook or Instagram or wherever you might get your news. And so I think what it has done is it has expanded probably the number of headlines that you see, right? So you're now getting a wider swath of information than you may have before, but you're not going nearly as deep, presumably, because you're not clicking in and reading. And, part of this is a media industry problem too. Like a lot of stuff, including at Bloomberg's behind a paywall, right? So oftentimes if I do click, hey, I really want to read this. Oh, I hit a paywall, and you're not going to pay for 20 different news subscriptions. Most people are not. And so then you end up going back and you sort of get trained to think like, oh, I'm not even going to click because it just sort of, I'm running into these paywalls all the time. And like, I just think this way of news distribution has pros and cons. It's much faster, which is great. Like I said, you do get exposed to more ideas, which is great, but you're not going as deep. And I also think, one thing I've certainly noticed, and maybe this is how it always was, but I just didn't notice it as much, is people have made up their mind on a lot of these stories or headlines before they ever read them or learn anything more about it, right? And so you feel like as a journalist, sometimes you're presenting this, thoughtful summary of the facts, and yet some people are going to agree with you from the get-go, and it doesn't matter what you write, they're going to say, yes, this story is good or bad or whatever. And there are just as many people who feel the exact opposite. They're never going to take it seriously, and they see the headline and immediately assume, it's clickbait or it's fake news or you're anti, Donald Trump or someone else. And so I just think, it's a really tough industry right now because I don't feel that there's a lot of room for nuance, both because of these platforms, but also just because of the way that people have sort of dug their heels in on various sides of the political spectrum.
Kurt, it's kind of interesting. So you're hitting on a topic that I haven't discussed yet on the show, but I talk about often with friends and colleagues. It's this psychology idea of groupthink. And I think this pertains in particular to not just Gen Z, but alpha and millennials as it relates to social media, whereby a person thinks that she or he might have a particular idea on a topic, and then will jump into social media to validate whether or not I'm thinking the right thing, to not just see what my friends are saying about that topic, but also what the media is doing. So they come across someone like you, a proper trained journalist who's doing, tons of work to create these stories, to get verifiable information, facts, sources, and they're not clicking deeper because maybe they don't want to pay for it, but they see the headline. The headline could verify what they're thinking, and then that social consciousness seeps into every part of our society.
Yeah, I mean, there's a term for that on social media, right? Which is this filter bubble, right? And this idea that you are following people, whether intentionally or unintentionally, who probably reinforce your beliefs and ideals and share similar views that you have, right? And that's, I'm not a psychologist, so I don't want to talk out of turn here, but that makes total sense to me, right? You would go on, you would see someone who says something, you say, yeah, I agree with that. That sounds smart. That aligns with my views. You follow that person, and now as a result, you start to, you get more of that, right? And you can see how maybe starting in the middle of this spectrum, you could very easily go one way or the other, just simply through that process of sort of coming across someone who agrees with you, follow them, engage with them. And now these algorithms say, oh, okay, let me show you more stuff like that, right? And you can see people going further and further in each direction. You almost have to go out of your way to follow people or engage with stuff that is maybe of an alternate viewpoint in order to get that take. And so, there's been a lot of research around this. So again, I don't want to, I'm not looking at it and I don't have it memorized, so I don't want to speak out of turn here. But you have heard that term, and I think there's some validity there, which is, these networks are trained to give you what you want to see, to make it so that you come back and spend more time. And oftentimes that means, showing you stuff that's either shocking or something that, aligns with your beliefs and makes you feel kind of validated.
Wow, that's pretty wild. Admittedly, I haven't heard of the term of art filter bubble, but I guess it totally makes sense, particularly for where we are in this day and age, and with the next generation of consumers. But that also must have a greater effect on the polarization of our society, right, Kurt? Because now, if I'm only hearing the news that I prefer to hear, and I'm hearing from voices who I prefer to listen to, I would have trouble deducting as to what would be the truth.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the kind of problem with the system and why it can be kind of viewed as broken in some ways, especially when it comes to news, right? Is that you tend to, again, get reinforced with something, and if maybe the original path you go down or the original belief you have is inaccurate, well, you could be reinforced with more people who believe something to be inaccurate, right? And so now suddenly this idea of maybe a conspiracy theory, for example, gains a lot more steam, because before, before the internet, maybe you'd be sitting at home and being like, man, I have this theory, it's really crazy, but you weren't constantly, running into other people who necessarily shared that and were reinforcing that. I just think it's much easier in 2024 to go out online, and not just on social networks, but just in general, and find people, communities, right, that sort of feel and believe the things that you believe, right? And in some cases, that's very harmless. You're into gardening, you're into cooking, you're into whatever. You go find those people and you feel validated and supported. In some cases, QAnon or Pizzagate or whatever it is, you go and you can similarly find, communities and people who are reinforcing those beliefs, but that can just be a much more dangerous thing than, maybe it used to be.
It's also complicated because I think the traditional rules and guidelines of journalism are completely thrown out the window when it applies to content creation and social media. So, where do you stand as it relates to verifiable sources and information? Like, what's the impact now? When you mentioned QAnon, for example. Like, if I'm in that community and I'm listening to everything that QAnon is saying and taking everything at face value without doing the legwork, what happens to our community? Why aren't people holding a higher standard as it relates to verified sources and verified information anymore?
Well, and to be clear, the idea that people were getting misinformation has existed for a long time, right? So I don't want to say that this is a brand new idea, just simply that it's become easier, I think, to be exposed to this type of stuff, or easier to reinforce those ideas. But, I think there is some legwork now in finding what is true versus what is an opinion versus what might be misinformation, in some cases intentional. And I think that there's a lot of people who maybe news, they scroll because they want to feel like they're sort of educated at a headline level, and it's not worth the effort to go and say, hey, I'm going to sit down and like read this real deep dive. I think there's also part of it is probably on the media, right? Which is like, we as the media, it's our job to condense sometimes these very complicated or nuanced subjects into something that people can easily digest and read. And so, that's inevitably going to leave certain details out. That's inevitably going to change. You can't condense the war in the Middle East into a 600-word news article, right? And expect people to walk away and feel completely educated about what's going on. And so part of that is that's the role of the media, but part of that also is like people need to be interested and willing to go kind of do this on their own a little bit. And I'm not sure, what percentage of people are into that or have the time to go do that. And so what you do instead is you read the headlines and you watch the snippet of TV news or whatever, and that becomes the basis for your entire view on a particular subject. And again, I don't think that's totally new. I just think we see it so much more because of social media. You're exposed to the various viewpoints so much more because of social media that it feels more dramatic now than it probably used to.
Yeah, it definitely feels more dramatic to me. I'll admit it. So you highlight 2016 as this transformative moment for social media, generally speaking. Do you think that we'll see another transformative moment for social media in the imminent future, maybe within the next 5 years or so?
I think so. I think one thing that's we're paying close attention to is this idea of generative AI, right? Where you're now not just seeing content from your friends or family or celebrities or whoever, but you're seeing content that has been completely created with AI, right? A video that's been totally fabricated, audio that sounds like a celebrity, but is really it's fake. It's been doctored or whatever. And so you can imagine a huge moment, whether it's around the election or something else, where basically the world gets duped, right? People think, oh no, here's a clip of Donald Trump saying something or Joe Biden saying something, and it truly changes maybe the person, maybe it changes a vote, maybe it changes the outcomes of an election, maybe it leads to a war, right? Like, or close to a war. It builds, it kind of cuts through this idea of trust and being able to say, well, at least I could verify with my eyes that, I'm watching this on video and I therefore know that it happened. That's kind of out the window, or if not yet, it will be very soon. And so I don't know what that moment's going to be, but I could very well imagine a major moment on a social network like this that sort of again pivots the entire industry into another sort of pre and post, right? So for me it was pre 2016 election, post 2016 election. Maybe it's going to be pre that doctored video that led to a missile strike, and post that doctored video. And so you hope that that does not happen, but the technology is just getting too good. The AI technology is that it makes me wonder if we're going to see a moment like that at some point in the near future.
So you won't be surprised if something like this happens.
No, I don't think so. I mean, we're already seeing, doctored audio of President Joe Biden. We're seeing, you may recall, there was a deep fake nude photos of Taylor Swift that went viral online recently. And, for the most part, people scramble to try and immediately say, this is fake, don't believe it, whatever. But this stuff moves so fast. And there are people who, whether it's fake or not, they'll see it and think it's real because I've seen it. And I think that's where you're just never going to be able to clean up a mess once it happens. I just don't know how big of a mess we're ultimately going to come across.
So we're going to get to this point, I think, culturally, where most people should not trust the sources and should not trust the information, right? It's almost as if we're like going to the next extreme because of artificial intelligence.
It's going to be very hard to trust on the surface what you see on social media in the next couple of years because of the advancements of AI, right? And so it's sad for me to hear, hey, don't trust anything, right? Because I'm a journalist. It's like you build your whole reputation sort of on this idea of trust, and that readers will hopefully come to Bloomberg or come to Kurt Wagner's feed and say, we know he does good work, therefore we can trust, the news that he's reporting. But the reality is when you're starting to get into this world where things can be fabricated and look so real, look so legitimate, but are totally made out of a software program, it does create this uncertainty where people are no longer going to be able to instantly say, I've seen it with my eyes, therefore it's true. I think that is where people are going to have to pause and figure out, where's this coming from? Has it been validated, et cetera?
Kurt, do you think politics and government will always have such a heavy presence in social media? Well, it doesn't seem like it was like that at the outset, but a lot of our conversation, we just keep going right back to it, right? The political landscape, the elections, the geopolitics. Do you think it's always going to be there now? Is this like the new medium for politics to play itself out?
Well, I think that just demonstrates how important these networks became and have become, right? That this is the place where discussion around politics and culture sort of happens. It's hard to imagine 20 years from now, maybe these networks won't exist. Maybe we'll all be, doing something in our VR head or AR glasses or headsets or whatever, right? So I don't want to say something definitive necessarily forever, but it's hard for me to imagine politics being removed from the equation so long as we're continuing to get our news from these places, right? Because politicians, they want to be where readers are. They want to try and influence, opinion and voter sentiment. So they go to the places that people are discussing these things. And I think that is why we've seen such a huge impact on X or what was Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, TikTok, right? And TikTok, we haven't even talked about TikTok, right? But that's like such a great example of blending social networking and politics, right? It is a network where for the most part, people are scrolling through and watching dance videos and comedians and skits. And yet it's at the center of a huge geopolitical struggle between the US and China, right? And it's like, in some ways, it's almost how the heck did we get here? And on the other hand, it's like, this just, again, goes to prove how instrumental these networks are. And to go back to maybe your question at the very beginning, you were sort of like, is social media still important? I think that sort of speaks for itself at this point, right? These networks keep showing up at the most important stage we have. And that sort of answers the question for us.
Absolutely. But just like, since you brought up TikTok, and I don't want to spend too much time on TikTok today, but it's I'd be remiss to not mention we have a situation where there is this geopolitical battle, right? We're concerned about China owning and operating TikTok and accessing Americans' data and beyond. I know, like, we had on our show, a guest of mine was the chief technology officer of New York City, and the New York City mayor's office has banned TikTok from every employee's phone. They're not able to use it on government issued phones. I don't know if you're aware of that, or government issued devices. It's pretty compelling. But yet, both presidential candidates, Trump, I guess I should include RFK, but Trump and Biden are embracing TikTok publicly, like using it and talking in favor of it. So is it like just too strong of a drug at this point? Like, they realize perhaps that it's not such a good thing for America, but yet because it reaches, that younger demographic in such a powerful way, they'll do it anyway?
I think so. And I mean, it again proves the importance of reaching young people where they are, right? Because TikTok is, of course, predominantly popular among young people, young potential voters, which is why you're seeing someone like Joe Biden use it. There is, and I got to be somewhat careful, but like, there's a level of hypocrisy, right, across, and this is not just unique to this situation. I think it's something we see across political parties and government in a lot of different things. But here is one example, right? Joe Biden has said, "I'm going to sign this bill that will ultimately, force TikTok to either be divested from its Chinese parent or be banned." Warning about the data security threats, warning about the influence of maybe the Chinese government using the algorithm to feed people a particular narrative or sway political opinion, and yet he's using it to campaign at the same time, right? And you see this this tension between, here's what I'm saying: I'm warning you that this thing is bad and is bad for national security, so much so that we might force the app stores to remove it, and at the same time, it's so valuable because we know people are using it that I'm gonna hope to raise some campaign dollars there. There's just this like really crazy tension that's happening around TikTok, but you could find several examples of this, I think, with tech and politics right now. It's hard for me to sort of wrap it's a little bit, as an observer, it can be a little bit frustrating because it feels hypocritical to me. But I think that's unfortunately the political system in which we kind of operate in right now.
It is. It's a sign of the times for sure. I agree. It's interesting to take the concept of political influence a little further to a recent Supreme Court case surrounding both the Biden administration and the Trump administration's use of social media to effectively coerce the American public. I'm sure you're familiar with this case. So, at what point do we need to say, like, it's a little bit too much? The government shouldn't be involved. We are maybe perhaps limiting freedom of speech or other constitutional rights when the government is kind of stepping on the scales a little bit with social media.
I think it's a real pendulum situation. It's a constant sort of back and forth, right? I think if you look historically, I'll use Twitter as the example because that's sort of what we're talking about today, or I guess what's now X. Twitter used to be, believe it or not, its old CEO called it the free speech wing of the free speech party. Like there was this idea that you could post basically anything to Twitter so long as it wasn't child pornography or like ISIS support videos or something, and you were kind of fair game, right? And the pendulum started to swing because people started to leave Twitter. They were saying, "I'm sick of being harassed." They'd have high profile celebrities who'd say, I'm getting bullied off of Twitter and now I'm leaving. And the company made a business decision to sort of start to clean itself up. And, it was like, hey, we're going to clean up hate speech. We're going to clean up racism because we're seeing that it's bad for business to have that stuff on there. Then I think 2020 happened, COVID, the post election with Donald Trump, basically disputing the election results. And you saw the pendulum move very dramatically in the other direction, right? Well, now, if you're saying something that the government believes is inaccurate about COVID, you're going to be suspended. If you're disputing the election results, you're going to be suspended or taken down. And you saw people say, whoa, 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 whoa. We've moved, the pendulum went from the free speech wing of the free speech party to, I can't, dispute the accurate or the helpfulness of masking, right? And so now you're seeing it start to move the other direction because Elon Musk then came in and bought the company, and he's now saying hey, we've gone way too censorship heavy. We're going to move it the other way, right? So I kind of bring this up. It's a little long winded. I apologize, but the point being is that this is a constant ebb and flow that sort of reflects, I think, what's going on in the world, what's going on with the business, what people, the consumer, sort of feel in that moment. And I think like Elon is kind of at risk of taking it the other direction right now, back to where we were, maybe in 2014, 2015, where it's like people are being bullied off of this app. People feel like they can't go on X without being exposed to racist content or pornography or whatever it is. And maybe it will, again, swing back the other way. So I just feel like this is what it's going to be. I don't know. I think this cycle is hard to fix, because free speech means something different to every person who you talk to, and so they're never going to find that perfect medium. But I think they're sort of constantly going back and forth trying to do that.
Yeah, it's interesting as you're talking about this pendulum and the flow to both extremes. I was thinking in my mind, like, wouldn't it be nice? I think most people are hoping for some kind of centrist, moderate positioning. I just don't. I don't think we're going to get there quickly. But when you talk about Elon, like dragging it back, the pendulum back towards like this open speech and bringing back bullying and all of this, like, is so many people think like Elon Musk is dangerous as a result of it. Like, would you categorize Elon Musk as dangerous?
I think there's this feeling very similar to President Trump for me, where the influence that those two people in particular have over culture and the way that people view a particular issue is so strong, right? I mean, it's like hard to quantify. I think Elon has like 160 million followers or something, which is obviously a huge audience, but it's just hard to quantify how much he can sway public opinion and perception around a particular topic, right? And we're seeing him try to, do this around topics like immigration, DEI, like diversity and inclusion efforts. He sort of has picked a few particular topics that he feels strongly about, and he's hammering them with his audience on X, if not daily, weekly. And so I think where it can become dangerous is when you have someone who maybe takes a stance that leads to a dangerous outcome, right? We saw this with President Trump and the election results, in my opinion, right? He's sitting here saying, the election's rigged, you need to come fight for me. And what happens? We see an insurrection at the US Capitol, right? And I think that is where you can see when this message is hammered home over and over and over to 160 million people on a daily basis or weekly basis, you can see a real world outcome of that. And so, do I think that like Elon is sitting around intentionally trying to harm people? I certainly hope not. But do I think that sometimes the rhetoric that can come from not just those two, I use those two as an example, but anyone with that level of power and influence, is their rhetoric going to have an impact on the real world? And I think the answer is absolutely. And so it depends on the stances that they choose to take and whether or not those can lead to, harms in the real world.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to evaluate your comments and then, go back to what we were talking about a minute ago, where we're living in this time where people are okay with sound bites, where they'll look at a headline and say, well, that must be the truth. So if you couple those things together, perhaps the impact on the general sentiment of the masses can really shift in a significant way. Most people are not going to do the legwork, to do the research and come up with some level of deductive thinking.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, again, when you admire a person, right? I mean, there's a lot of people who admire Elon for his business and technical success with SpaceX and Tesla. And so, you follow him, perhaps you started following him years ago for that, right? Hey, this is a guy who's built some incredible technologies. And then, now you're getting fed anti-immigration content, or now you're seeing how DEI is, the root cause for X, Y, and Z. And so sometimes, people maybe sign up to follow someone they admire for one thing, and then when that person's interests or mission or whatever it might be pivots, well, now suddenly there's a whole group of people who are being exposed to other ideas. Now, I'm not saying shouldn't be exposed to other ideas by any stretch. I'm just simply saying that there can be things that can be more dangerous than others, in my opinion, or certainly more divisive than others. And I think that that's what we're seeing right now with Elon. I think he's choosing to talk about a lot of things that can be incredibly divisive. And I think we saw that with President Trump a lot as well when he was in charge and using X on a daily basis.
So do you think the idea of saying that Elon Musk is a true free speech advocate is a stretch?
I do. I think there's too many examples of him, you know, saying, "Hey, I want free speech," but when that free speech sort of rubs up against another one of my goals or things that I care about, I'm willing to compromise, right? And
His
so
personal or you're talking about his personal or professional goals, right?
that's right. That's right. And
Going back to
so,
your book now.
yeah, I was going to say we can go back to the book for a second because I have a couple examples in here. But like, there's one. This was a week after he took over, right? So he'd been talking about bringing free speech back, free speech absolutist, all of this stuff. And a week after he takes over, there were users, kind of regular people on X, who were out and they were harassing or criticizing advertisers on X, right? They were saying, "How can you advertise? How can you give money to this guy?" Blah blah blah. They're peppering these advertisers with negativity. And this was driving Elon crazy, right? Because he's like, "Hey, this is impacting our business. Now all of a sudden, I'm relying on these advertisers for revenue, and I have people harassing them. We're going to suspend these harassers," right? And it's to me, it was such a clear example of I'm supportive of free speech until, right? Because in this case, it was like until that free speech might start to hurt the business that I'm running. And I think there's many, that's just one example. There's many examples like that, I believe, sort of in Elon's history and in his short time running X, to me, to sort of convince me that, like, while I think he talks a big game about free speech, I think there are limits to what he believes should be allowed. And I think sometimes that line can be drawn just wherever it's most convenient for him or the companies he's running.
So, but personally, Kurt, I happen to be like a major free speech advocate. I feel like everything needs to be out in the marketplace. But admittedly, there are some people that have accounts on X that just are mind blowing to me. Like, why would he allow for Iran's supreme leader, Khomeini, to have an account on X? Like, I just don't even understand the need to have, it's always hate speech that's coming from Khomeini. It's always, wild, radicalized, anti-America, anti-Jewish speech. So, what about the idea of limiting personalities on X that are just, built up to be hateful?
Yeah, I mean, he's sort of made a pretty
Bizarre.
conscious effort to, bring back actually people who are very controversial or who have had been previously suspended or banned from X for breaking the rules or whatever, right? And part of me thinks this is, a bit of the sales pitch from Elon, right? Is that, hey, he wants Twitter to be edgy. He knows that the edgier X, he knows that the edgier it is, the more controversial it is, maybe the more attention that it's going to get, right? And I'm sort of now putting myself in his shoes. I don't know exactly why he would want the supreme leader of Iran to have a megaphone on Twitter. But at the same time, that's not out of line with sort of how he has handled other accounts on Twitter or how he has framed his belief of Twitter, right? And I think, look, if he wanted to come out and say, literally, we will let anything go, short of, you would certainly hope, short of child pornography or anything like that, if he said any type of speech beyond that is fair game, okay, that's one thing. But that's not really what he's doing. He's saying, hey, it's free speech, and he's making all these other concessions, but then he allows, some very controversial folks on there. So that's where for me, it becomes hard to take the free speech thing seriously, because it feels like there's all these examples on both sides that are like, okay, well, why is he's taking this down, but he says he loves free speech, and he's leaving this up, but he says he loves to protect, the sort of the privacy of the conversation or the safety of the conversation. You really can't, it's hard to do both those things, and I'm not sure he's doing a great job.
So I guess one question as it relates to that is, shouldn't the market just regulate itself? Like, he's providing the platform, and if everybody goes in there, it should be the marketplace's decision and obligation to go and verify sources and verify the news and decide whether or not they're tuning into, what might be total crap or what might be the most important information ever.
Well, and this is really the argument for why these rules at these platforms exist at all, right? These are businesses. And so they come up with these rules. They say, hey, we're going to limit what you can say around hate speech or around racism or sexism or whatever. In some cases, there are legal reasons, right? Like that's why they take down terrorist content or they take down child pornography or other things. Like there are legal reasons that you want that stuff off of your platform. But when it comes to speech, they've made decisions around what you can and cannot say because they are trying to attract the largest possible audience, or at least that's how it's been historically, right? We talked about the pendulum swinging with Twitter before Elon got there. Well, they're swinging that pendulum because they're trying to get people to show up, and people aren't going to show up if they feel like everything they see on there is offensive. And so, to your point, it lets the market dictate, right? Like people are willing to vote with their time. Does this network feel like it adheres, to the what I'm comfortable with in terms of speech? Yes or no. I'm going to spend time there. Yes or no. And so, part of me thinks like that's what we're dealing. That's still what we're dealing with, right? But Elon has said, I don't, this goes back years now at this point. But he said, I don't care about the business of X. It's just about free speech, right? But then he makes decisions as if he's running a business, which I think is a totally reasonable thing to do. I just wish he would say that, like, hey, I'm making these rules to try and maximize the business potential of this network. He sort of says the opposite all the time, which is where I think, again, you get this sort of rub, right? It's hard to have a big business with complete and total free speech because people aren't just going to want to show up to something like that.
So when you talk about the big business piece, I mean, Musk made a $44 billion gamble here on X. Do you think it's even feasible for this company to reach profitability and to even get some return on that investment?
At 44 billion, it's hard to imagine right now. I mean, there's historically there has been a time when Twitter was worth well north of 44 billion, at least on paper, right? So like, is there a path to, doubling, tripling this business? Sure. What's difficult to imagine is that happening under the current ownership and the current business structure, because X makes at least, it did make about 90% of its revenue from advertising. It still makes the majority of its revenue from advertising. The problem is that you now have an owner who is, tweeting things that are quite controversial, allowing or not allowing certain speech sort of based on his own personal beliefs. And most importantly, going out, I don't know if you remember, but in December, he went on stage at a conference in New York at the DealBook Summit and told advertisers to go F themselves, right? And so
that was amazing.
Yeah, it's like one of the craziest things I've ever seen.
I thought he was on drugs I thought he was on drugs when he did that. I was like truly shocked. I know that he's come out and advocated for like ketamine treatments lately, but like I did not understand those comments at all.
It was wild. I've never seen anything like that from someone of that level of sort of success and power. My point being, though, is that it's hard to imagine a bridge being built between X and the advertising community when you have Elon doing the things that he's been doing since he took over. And so when you paint it like that, you say, okay, well, if ads aren't going to be what doubles or triples his business, what is? What's the other business opportunity here? And they haven't come up with anything yet. So that's where I'm like, is it possible? Of course it's possible. We've seen networks grow beyond this size and scale before, but is it likely with the current setup? I would say absolutely not.
Well, when you talk about the business model, I mean, as you're very well aware, Musk has been publicly stating that this is going to transform into the everything app, where this new endeavor will have X compete with FaceTime and dating apps and YouTube and banking and LinkedIn. And, obviously he launched Grok, artificial intelligence. So do you think, Kurt, that they're making progress towards becoming the everything app? Do you think that we'll see some kind of cryptocurrency exchange built into X at some point, or is this all blue sky?
I think we're seeing progress in the sense that they are continuing to move forward with this plan. I'm skeptical that this is what is going to ultimately save Twitter for a couple reasons. One, a lot of the things that they're trying are things that we've seen tried before without success, right? And so a good example actually is that they're launching this app for connected TVs. And it's the idea that you could open your TV and watch videos from X from your living room, I guess. You could sit on your couch and scroll through. Does anybody want that? It's my question. Like, is anyone sitting here saying, I need another place to watch videos from X and I want it to be on my television? And I would say probably not. That's, I'm happy to be proven wrong, but it seems to me like that's not something people are clamoring for. Let's also talk about the banking. Like, this would require an incredible change in consumer behavior, right? That people would have to say, I want to start storing my money through my social network, not my bank, not Chase, but I want X to hold my money and give me a percentage yield or whatever on my savings account. Is that going to happen? Is that what people are looking for? And I'm not sure the answer is yes there either. So my point being is that they're kind of going in all of these, they're sort of throwing everything at the wall. Let's be the everything app, as you point out. But there are a lot of things, there are a lot of other businesses that do those things really well already. And I'm not sure that people are looking for a single app to do all of this stuff. And so I'm skeptical that this is the plan to go to. Now, for me, what Twitter always did best, better than anyone, was it did news, right? That's what it was for. Now, maybe that business was always going to be limited because there's only so, you can only grow so big as a news focused service. But at least that was their thing. That was what they were best at. That's what differentiated them from everyone else. I worry that now if they're just getting into video and banking and payments, they're just going to do the same things that a bunch of other businesses already do better. And I'm not sure that that's the strategy to really differentiate.
But look, just to play devil's advocate, with all due respect, for a second, like there is some proof of concept with those two pillars that we just touched on as it relates to like scrolling and watching on television. I know for sure that Gen Z and Gen Alpha, as bizarre as it is to me, are engaging with YouTube's original content on television now. So and that, I also realize that Elon Musk and his team have been advocating for exclusive content to be published in long form now from sports and beyond on X. And then we know that there's also proof of concept with platforms like Venmo, payment transfer systems and whatnot. So maybe the next generation will find it convenient to have everything in this everything app format. But everything kind of goes back to like Elon Musk. Like, is the brand X or is the brand Elon Musk? Like, it's funny. Like, obviously, there must be a branding problem. My background is advertising, you might remember, and even during the course of this conversation, you and I several times have been, vacillating between should we call it Twitter, should we call it X, and clearly there's a branding problem. But the advertising perspective also goes back to like what Elon is saying personally, and people hate Elon Musk, but yet there's this ability also to have like, Khamenei next to Coca-Cola or Khamenei next to Disney. Like, where does that come into play? So there's so many like moving parts as it relates to this social media platform in particular that are truly complicated. And I think he needs to unlock the financial value that perhaps a banking system or an original content platform can bring to the platform, because he's just losing so much advertising revenue. And I know I'm throwing a lot out there, but
No,
just
I mean,
worth noting.
so I'll maybe address like the YouTube comment first, only because I agree with you, right? There is an example of this working, which is YouTube. There's a major difference between X and YouTube, which is that YouTube has the largest video library in the entire world, including a very advanced way for creators of video to make money, to build a life or a business using that platform. X doesn't have any of that stuff, right? X has historically not been a place for video. It does not have a setup for making, enticing essentially video creators to come over and say, here, let me give you all my hard work for free because I know I'm going to get paid from an advertiser in return. It just doesn't exist there. So while I agree this does work for YouTube, I'm not convinced it's going to work for X, because this is not what X does. And I haven't seen anything from them that has convinced me that they will be able to do that, right? They've announced a few premium video partners, including Don Lemon, who and that one already fell apart, right?
That
That
blew
was a
up
pretty
one
big,
day
messy
before they even got to the starting gate,
before they
right?
even got to the starting gate.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I'm sort of being, I realize that I'm sort of being a little bit negative here on X, but I just think that kind of goes back to what I was saying, which is like they are trying to do a bunch of things that other businesses have already mastered or are doing really well. And they're at a huge, huge disadvantage because they're starting from zero. Video being, in my opinion, one of those examples. Payments, you mentioned Venmo. You're right. Like there is a need for me to be able to send my friends or family money very easily. But guess what? There's already a half dozen very easy places I could do that. Do I need to do that on the social network that I use? And I'd say the answer is no. So that's my feeling, right? Not that these types of businesses can't exist or that they can't be incredibly successful. It's that, is this the best use of X's time and resources to go after? And I'm not sure that it is.
That's interesting. A lot of it is like cult of personality with Elon Musk, and it goes both ways. And like I said, it's like there's a big part of the planet that loves Elon and that hates Elon. In fact, just this morning, I heard this Australian senator call for the imprisonment of Elon Musk, that Elon should be jailed. I'll read you the quote because I realize this is essentially breaking news, and you might not have heard it. She said her name is Jackie Lambie, and she called for Musk to be imprisoned. She said, quote, Elon Musk has no social conscience or conscience whatsoever. Quite frankly, the bloke should be jailed. But quite frankly, the power that man has because of that platform that he's on, it's got to stop. It has absolutely got to stop. And it's like remarkable to me how he's such a polarizing personality, and that this person, Jackie Lambie, admittedly, I don't know if she's an advocate or what her background is. I do understand she's an Australian senator, though, that she's like publicly calling for, Elon to be imprisoned. It's wild.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know all the specifics of that either, but I would say like, politicians in the US certainly love to say the most headline grabby, most attention grabby thing that sort of sounds like that. Maybe transcends to Australian politics as well. But it's sort of, to your point, like let's set aside the logistics of should or should he not be put in jail, which I think is maybe a conversation for a different podcast. But to your point, it just shows you're right. This is an incredibly polarizing person. He's become more and more polarizing in the last 2 years since he took over X, more so than he ever was just as the CEO of Tesla and SpaceX. And I think what happened is that for a long time his sort of missions were viewed as good or well intentioned, right? Oh, he's trying to save the environment by coming up with electric vehicles. Oh, he's trying to explore space, find out where the future of human civilization is going to live. And I think there were a lot of people who thought this is pretty exciting. This is a guy who's willing to sacrifice time and money and attention for the good of humanity, right? That was sort of the view of Elon maybe 5 years ago. And I think what happened with X is that he has been public in a way that most people never saw him before. They knew who Elon was maybe as the CEO of Tesla, but that was sort of it. They didn't listen to everything he said. They didn't see everything that he said or believed because it wasn't broadcasted on X to 160 million people every single day. And I think owning X has sort of changed that perception because we're hearing from him more often. I think we're seeing, the way he engages and who he interacts with more often in ways that we didn't before. And I think that's just rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. People who probably would have supported him 5 years ago who are now saying, wow, he's a very different person than I thought he was. And I think his ownership of X has sort of exposed that to a lot of people.
So, Kurt, it's interesting because in Battle for the Bird, in your book, Battle for the Bird, you talk about the pre-Elon Twitter culture seeming really galvanized, like a great level of morale and a place that people love to work. I'm wondering if this concept has translated into the corporate culture at X. Like, have we witnessed a diminished morale since Elon's, at the helm?
There was a huge diminished morale early on, right? Because there were all of these sort of there were all these people who were hanging over from Twitter 1.0 into X. And I'd say that first year, there were, people for various reasons, financial, visa reasons for some people who were maybe in the country on a work visa. There are people who thought, well, maybe this could work, or maybe this is the kind of person I want to work for. And then they find out 6 months in, okay, Elon's not that person for me, right? And so I think that first year was really tough when it came to morale. He was also fresh off of layoffs, killing a bunch of projects, killing a bunch of teams. That's obviously, that sucks when you're working at a company and your team gets decimated, or this thing you've been working on for years gets thrown out the window. That's tough. We're now about 18 months into Twitter 2.0, I would say, which is obviously now X. And I think that the people who remain, in a lot of cases, it's because they want to work for Elon, right? They believe that Elon is changing the world. They believe that Elon is changing speech, or could change the speech and freedom of speech. So I think we're sort of at the stage where the people who are left are pretty, for the most part, pretty loyal to him, pretty loyal to the mission. They know what they've signed up for, right? Whereas I think when he took over, there's people who sort of were like, this is not what I signed up for. But I need a paycheck for the next 6 months for whatever reason. I'm going to stick this out. So, as with everything, over time, I think you see the old guard sort of fully leave, and you see the new guard come in. And those are the people who say, I'm signing up for a reason. I'm signing up for this company and this CEO because I believe in him. And I think we're more there than we were a year ago.
That's interesting. So like when you talk about like this lofty aspiration of using X to change the world, and now this new regime comes along and follows behind Elon to do so, my mind goes directly into the Twitter files. And it's kind of funny because when those were breaking, they caught my attention. I was like, wow, these are like some terrible things that have been exposed as it relates to the way the company was operating and outside third parties and all. And then I was thinking, like, as of today, it doesn't even seem like people care anymore. It seems like that's just old news, and it hasn't changed the way that society is functioning or operating. So I'm wondering, like, if you could take a second, maybe first to just explain to the audience what the Twitter files. I know there's a lot there. So like from a top line level, like what are the Twitter files? And then to your point, like, have they played a role in changing the world at all?
Yeah. So the Twitter files was this idea shortly after Elon took over to essentially expose the prior ownership or the prior leadership at Twitter for what he felt were some egregious, free speech or content violations, right? And so he brought a couple of journalists in. He basically said, you have free reign through all of our systems, right? You can go through old emails, you can go through old Slack messages, you can see all the internal messy discussion around a particular, decision that the company had made, be it, for content rules. And like, let's expose this, right? I think he said something like sunshine's the best disinfectant, right? His idea being that we are going to make the old group look bad and expose all the bad things they did, to set the clean the slate and move forward into this new sort of Twitter 2.0 or what is now X. So there was a ton of attention, as you may remember, around sort of the first, second, third installments of the Twitter files. The very first one, I believe, was about the Hunter Biden laptop story. So if folks remember, in the run up to 2020, right before the election, there was a story about a laptop that had been owned by Hunter Biden and some files that were on the laptop. And Twitter had suppressed the links to that story because they thought it was they basically thought it was a hack. They thought that, they had a rule around sharing hacked materials. They thought all this material had been obtained through a hack. And so they said, like, you can't even share the link to this story. And, President Trump and conservatives were up and they were pissed, right? Because they're like, this is negative information about my political rival right before the election. And yet here Twitter is basically forbidding people to see it. Now, I'm sort of kind of this is why I'm a little reluctant to go into the Twitter files, only because it's like you go way down a rabbit hole on one particular issue, but this was an important one. It's also talked about in the book. Twitter made a mistake, and they said within about 24 hours, I think maybe 36 hours, they basically said, hey, this isn't hacked. We messed up. You can read the article right here. I would argue that like the decisions that they made about trying to ban the article probably drew way more attention to it than I think it probably would have gotten even if they hadn't tried to do that. So I'm not sure that anyone was like, oh, I didn't get to learn this because of Twitter. But the point being is that they were putting their thumb on the scale for a very important story right before a very important election. And so that was Twitter Files number one. And I bring that up because the idea was to expose the decision-making process behind these decisions. And there's now been tons of Twitter Files, sort of series that have come out over the years. And I think you're right. Like they have not landed in the way that I assume Elon thought they would. I think the first couple raised a bunch of, questions and raised some eyebrows. But for me, the biggest thing was, and I sort of mentioned this in the book, is I was like, for the most part, the Twitter Files that I've seen have simply exposed how complicated and messy these decisions are internally, right? Because with the Hunter Biden one, for example, we had internal Slack messages and emails of people saying, should we be doing this? What are we doing? Like, can we even defend this decision, right? You have employees in there basically saying, what are we doing? Was this the right call? Yes or no? And so to me, again, it sort of just shows like, these are really complicated decisions. In that case, Twitter made a mistake. They admitted the mistake and apologized. I don't think that anyone necessarily learned more about that situation from the Twitter Files that they couldn't have maybe anticipated. And so maybe that's why it didn't get as much attention as people thought that it would. But I do think, again, the idea to go full circle was let's expose the old group, make them look bad, and move forward and sort of set a clean slate. And I guess you could say that is done, and he's sort of done that. He's sort of accomplished that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Again, I keep going back in my mind to the concept of trust and verify, and the verification issue, like, just has to pull the rug under the veracity of what's being reported on Twitter, on X, on social media in general. I mean, like, we didn't get into Spaces at all, Kurt. Like, there's one thing to see it in writing, right, vis-a-vis a tweet, but like, I'll tune in. There's a very big, I think the biggest personality as it relates to Spaces and reporting the news is a guy named Mario Nawfal. And there are major issues with regards to the teams that surround him and help report breaking news, whether it's geopolitical or domestic or beyond. It's a major, major issue. So, I wonder what the impact will ultimately be when advertisers are not able to track spoken word, but start to realize like a lot of what's being said in these spaces are totally inaccurate as well.
Well, and that's someone that Elon has been on Spaces with a lot too, right? And so as a result, he's gotten an even a more elevated platform because Elon grants that to him, right? He says, like, I'll come, speak with you on Spaces and bring my 160 million followers with me. And so, to go back to, is Elon dangerous, right? That's an example of, him using this power to not just say, here are the issues I care about, and I'm going to hammer you with those issues, but to elevate other people around him as well, right? Who may or may not have, helpful things to say. And I won't speak to anyone in particular because I don't want to get into like the specifics of all these people. I don't know them all that well. My point just simply is that even being in Elon's orbit can be enough of a, boost to the rhetoric that you want to share.
For sure. So, Kurt, is X dying?
Boy, I get this question a lot. I think it is losing relevance, in my opinion. I'm not sure if that's the same as dying. I mean, the business we know is much smaller than it was before. The valuation of the company is much smaller than it was before. So from a business standpoint, I would say X is in an unhealthy situation. The bigger concern for me is the relevance, right? Because if X maintains relevance, people are still going to be there. Advertisers are still going to ultimately show up. Newsmakers, celebrities, politicians will show up. I'm not sure that X is as relevant today as it was 2 years ago. And I think if I look forward, 2 more years from now, I only see it going into the less relevant side of the spectrum. I'm actually interested what everyone has their own perspective on this and opinion. This is just my take on it. Curious what you think, but my worry is that the less relevant it becomes, the harder it is to build a business. And at a certain point, obviously those things start to snowball. But I'm curious what you think.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Like from my vantage point, use every social media platform and look at everything, and I see a lot of um, surplus space coming through the existing landscape of social media. I think there's a lot where communities just aren't engaging, aren't really looking. I think there are a couple of like big tent poles, but I think X has a place right now. I think it's an interesting community. I think it has a place where ideas and thoughts can travel across the globe, and I still think it's very powerful. I read somewhere, Kurt, for example, that it is the most heaviest trafficked. You might have written this actually when it comes to being like the number one place for people to find their news. I believe that X is the number one place for people to go into social media and find their news. So, clearly there's a certain need for it, but I guess we'll see what it transforms into.
Yeah, I mean, I still use it, right?
Yeah,
I'm
me
still
too.
there. I'm not there as often, I will admit. Like I used to be first thing in the morning, last thing at night. I would check it, what felt like hourly throughout the day. Like it was the place I went. I would say my usage, it's hard to say. I wish I actually, maybe I should go check my app usage, although I don't know if it has the historical stuff. But I would guess my time is probably cut in half. Um, uh, I'm one person, but I am also like that group of journalists who lived and died with Twitter for a long time and really cared about my following and my engagement and all that stuff. And I just don't as much anymore. And I don't think I'm alone in that. So we'll see. I hope it doesn't go away in the sense that like I've gotten a lot of value historically from it. I do agree with you. I think like it could fill a very important role, which is like the role of news distributor on the internet. I just don't think it's doing a great job right now of doing that. And we'll see. We'll see if that improves.
Are you following Khomeini?
No, I'm not. I'm not. I do follow Elon, obviously. So I
There you go.
get all my Elon stuff.
So, Kurt, you've given me a tremendous amount of your time and more importantly, your insight and knowledge today, and I truly appreciate it. Congratulations again on your awesome book, Battle for the Bird. I would highly recommend that everybody locks into this. It's really fantastic. Every guest I have, we have a tradition. We end the show with kind of looking into the future. I start a sentence and then the guest ends it, and we incorporate the name of the show, Some Future Day, into that sentence. So if you're game, I'd love to share this concept with you and see where you end up.
Okay, let's do it. Yeah, let's go.
All right, we're going to be very generalized here, but it's on point. In some future day, X will be
Bankrupt.
wow. In some future day, X will be bankrupt.
I know. That's again, I was
Mic
like,
drop.
I know that felt very dramatic, but I do worry about the business. I do worry about the business.
Amazing. Well, Kurt, thank you so much. It really has been a pleasure speaking with you today. Thank you for joining me on Some Future Day.
Thank you for giving me the chance to come on, and I hope people give the book a shot. It's a lot of love and effort went into that thing, so I hope people enjoy it.
I know your time is very important, so thank you so much for joining me today. For ongoing insight surrounding these important topics, you can join the conversation on my social media channels, including Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Marc Beckman. And to sign up for my newsletter on Substack, you can find me at marcbeckman.substack.com. To make sure you don't miss a show, be sure to subscribe to Some Future Day across all major platforms worldwide, including YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. Special thanks to New York University for producing Some Future Day, and a big shout out to my producer extraordinaire, John Boomhofer, for being patient and always encouraging me to push through. Thanks a lot, John. Have a great day.